Ooh. Okay, next I'd like to introduce someone who also makes me think a lot. Dr. Lyn Ashby. Ashby is thistoopress, and he produces graphically intensive and fascinating books that have always enthralled me, especially when wearing my graphic design hat. So please welcome him. I'll just get out of this. Huzzah. Dr. Lyn Ashby.
Well, here we are. Apparently I've got loads too many images, so we're going to have to hack through it and maybe sort of skip a lot. And I'm embarrassed to say that there's the word artist in there, but it's all part of the deal, isn't it? So this is all about me. Oh, okay. Can I just test this? Okay. So this is all about me. I came to the making of artist books fairly late, and I think of it as the scenic route, let's say, because before I truly discovered artist books, I studied and worked in various other areas, including photography, journalism, graphic design, filmmaking, and so on, and this heavily influenced how I got into it. And I didn't know it at the time, but I think I was searching for skills and ideas that would set me up later for making a type of book that I really was interested in. So when I truly did discover artist books, like some of these classics of the canon, I found it was, as Joanna Drucker said, it was the intersection zone of all of those other practices with their combined qualities in one medium. We had here intimate visual spaces, loads of room for experiment with imagery, text, typography, storytelling, and so on. And also I thought the actual physical book, the age-old book, had the wisdom and aura that I thought might offer me a medium for an expressive and, I confess, even therapeutic experiment. Artist books blew the lid off for me, and I guess this is me getting my lid blown off, I'm not sure. But there were two early events that focused a lot of this for me. I went back to London to do a master's in typography at the London College of Printing. And there I discovered the National Art Library in the V&A, and that's been a fantastic resource ever since. And the second event was I got a small grant to go to the Visual Studies workshop in upstate New York, in Rochester, and that was also great. So pretty soon I came up with my first two serious book efforts. I'm not sure if they were serious books, but they were serious book efforts. Alpha Topo and Sisyphus Goes Home were born together, very different. And when I look at them now, they're juvenilia. I see that they're work of an early practitioner. But they opened some doors for me, and I honor them here. And now you're going to have to look at some of these images, like it or not. And though my background was what I would say philosophic, and I use that word in the widest sense, and artistic, my production approach was from a working journalistic angle. So at home, getting this thing at home, it was a desktop, computer-based digital file compositing method that funneled everything, drawings, paintings, typography, stories, text, everything, into one printable file. This is the only way I could conceive it at the time, and later I'd output it in laser or in inkjet. My approach never was from, as a fine art printmaker. I just didn't have that experience, and I found that to be more common back in Australia. But back in Australia, I knew no one who was making artist books at the time, so I was obviously mixing in the wrong crowd. So I just started making these works. I didn't know who would read them or who wouldn't read them, or if they would have a home, and probably suspected. I didn't think about these things. But through all of that, I settled on a production model that was the handmade, limited edition, inkjet printed work that indeed I found later would sometimes sell to public collections and galleries or through exhibitions. I'm going to have to skim through, yeah. So right from the start, say this early one, Alpha Topo, this is the interesting aspect for me. This is the creative drivers, the why of making them. Why do we bother to make these books? And right from the start, this one, Alpha Topo, suggested one of these threads, what I call, well, it's about language and this slippage into a less coded hybrid visual nature. And this one kind of invented another language. I didn't know what I was doing, but there it was. And I was wondering, not only is this another language, is it another literacy? And an early example of this for me was this language thread is this book, I Decline Myself. This language uses language itself to inquire into the nature of selfhood. So the key question here is, who am I without language? What is my inner life? What is the self without language? So I used these translucent materials to composite the layers of the image of a self. But equally, I used layers of language to composite meaning. It was what I remembered from Latin. Apparently, the noun is declined in 6 cases. So I'm using the word decline in various ways here. I decline myself. I go through my declensions. And I thought, if we peel away these layers of language, meaning, self, and so on, with what are we left? Perhaps nothing, or no one, or pure light, perhaps. The back cover of this is bound with this translucent pain. And so the key question of this book goes beyond or after the last page. Other books came along using similar materials. Kiss, a book of conjugations, inquires how language builds meanings and so on. Idiot Grammatica was an investigation of how language makes meaning visually and spatially. And with all this, there was a fairly heavy nod towards Mallarmé, Un coup de dé, and Drucker's The Word Made Flesh, which I thought was just fantastic when I found it. But really all of this language research focused finally for me with this book, Decodex. And the main idea here was that since all the components, the alphabetic component, the components of our alphabetic language are more or less arbitrary, perhaps they were once pictographic or ideogrammic, what happens if I substitute these individual letter forms and grammatical structures with other forms that are equally functional but unfamiliar? So I'm not sure if you can see the transition going on here. And I was pushing all of this towards the visual. So words become spatial visual figures, and sentences become clusters of these visual figures. And I'm moving all of this from the phonetic code to the visuality of graphemic composites. And I thought if the reader was willing to follow these substitutions, which are explained and flagged right from the beginning in the text itself, they would be led into another unfamiliar language, albeit more visual and ideogrammic, and still stay literate. This was, oh, wow, could this be possible? For example, after all this time, this was a long time ago, I can still read, this is a sentence here, and I can see that it's got a verb to be in the middle with that little equal sign, and this reads, language is the memory of being at home everywhere in the world. And this is how it looks across that sort of cave wall, so to speak, and I'm pushing it all off the grid. This is another sentence, and it's also got the verb to be, as you can see it, but I can see it's got a question mark, so it reads, is the memory and meaning of the senses the first wordless language? So I kept pushing this towards the end, and I arrived at this image back here because there were several other threads working through this book, and one of them was how we make images with language in our mind, but also on the page. And I used the house as the main image. I described the house at the beginning, and then the language itself transformed visually and spatially into this image. And perhaps the thesis behind it all was something like, is language, oh my God, it's the true home. And from about this time, I have to say that I felt that the standard codex book form alone was rich and complex enough for my experiments without distraction of paper type experiments and so on. So I was interested more in the contents rather than the form. And I see this more now as aligned with the classic artist books as we saw from the top. So I make books that look a lot like books. Another creative driver here was what I think of as the philosophical thought experiment, which was evident in this book straight away. And I don't know if you know the story of Sisyphus. Despite severe existential constraint, we all know about Sisyphus, what happens if we just let Sisyphus go home? This is what I was asking. So I asked the book to elucidate on a sort of basic, simple existential query, and I'll just follow its lead. To my amazement, the book almost always came up with something credible on its own terms and with its own forms. There was other books that did this 20 minutes. What is the nature of time? Is it cyclical? Is it spiral? Or, as this book suggests, is it a double helix? There was the light down here. What might be the nature of a complete reality? And I was riffing on Plato's allegory of the cave. Oh my God. But a first early example of this. Oh, halfway one. Oh, relax. So a good. I thought it was 13. Anyway, okay, all right. So a first early example of this sort of what I call this sort of philosophical book experiment was this book, The 10,000 Things, and this phrase we've probably all heard, and it means the totality of our experience here in the world. And I thought, well, fair enough, but what would be the 10,001st thing? Huh? Well, okay. So I just started by compositing the images of things, and I would know the answer to my question when I came to the 10,001st thing, right? So I just had to count. But of course, there was a bit of copying and pasting, let's say, and I lost count. Okay. But the book delivered what I thought was a profound metaphysical answer. But from within, it's a certain printing method that's its own terms, really, and that's the half-tone screen print. So it confirmed a traditional wisdom, which I could say summarized is the 10,001st thing is purely a product of the 10,000 things. Apparently this is a paradigm that's all over science. You know, every cell of your body has the DNA of every other cell in your body, and so on. This is throughout science. And wow, this. Or I could mangle it a bit more by saying something like, everything is only and completely a product of every other thing, or everything is within everything. Apparently this is very Taoist. I didn't know anything about this before I did this book, and I realized these books are amazingly philosophical and inform me about all sorts of things. Other books had their questions. There was The Morning in May, How to Tell a Multimodal Story with these layered image and textual threads with a universal textual background. There was, at the end of the line, What is the nature of truth when truth is so multifaceted? But the last book I have time for here, my most recent, combines most of these threads. There's language inquiries, philosophical queries, experiments in ways of telling. But in addition, this work, sorry, I'll go back. The half of it, field notes from the suburbs, and I guess this is very autobiographical in a way. I'm just this guy from the suburbs trying to make sense of everything. In addition, this offers, I think, an alternative interpretation and representation to the usual linear and often linguistic meaning of a life. So this work starts and ends with conventional textual short story fragments about a particular life. But between the beginning and end, these fragments undergo spatial typographic transformations that totally reimagine this same ordinary life. So these circular forms are reconfigured versions of those same story fragments. They're still completely readable, but no longer linear, and therefore no longer is that life. And for me, they become more like bells ringing from all over times and spaces of that life. So the meaning of every moment now is the result of non-linear atemporal resonances. And when I looked at this, I thought, is this music? Is this how music works? And actually, there is a Nick Cave connection, but we'll have to talk about that some other time. And collectively, they make other abstract images that suggest meta-narratives, and generally the whole thing starts to settle back to that ordinary, linear, familiar life. This, I have to say, is also my near-death experience, my version. I never had a near-death experience, but I presume that one day I will, and it might be nearer than I would prefer. So maybe this is a sneak preview, but that's another story again, of course. So, in conclusion, I would say I see parallels with what I've been doing, and perhaps what other people have been doing here, with other practices. There's experimental typography, visual poetry, there's concrete poetry. The wisdom has come down through the ages and passed down, we stand on the shoulders of giants and all of that sort of stuff. And what I see here is the enticing slippage of familiar language forms into and out of other liberating shadow forms. And I personally am interested in using this shadow language to imagine other options for the various cultural and philosophical ideas that are falling on our lap, let's say. In final conclusion, I still don't know who reads and views these works. And in my moments of depression, I think perhaps very few people. But despite this, I've always had a strong sense that these works, the ones that we make, probably many of us here, are nevertheless somehow necessary. It's almost as if, and I've had a strong feeling about this, that perhaps they're sort of playful emissaries from the future of language. And I feel compelled at this point to say something like, well, maybe there's a book in that. So that's all I have time for. Thank you very much.
Sorry, my bell ringing's a bit random, but